Feminism. Introduction. The status and role of women in society is a matter of concern because women have suffered and continue to suffer from because of their sex. The conception stands for empowerment of women. It stands for protest against the secondary status given to women in society due to the patriarchal system. The word feminism was coined in 1837 by Charles Fourier, a utopian socialist French philosopher. Feminist movement. The history modern Western feminist movement into three waves. First wave, the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe was regarded as the Enlightenment age during which feminist movement gained momentum. Christine de Pizan, an Italian, was possibly the earliest feminist writer. In 1405, she published the Book of the City of Ladies, which showed the importance of women's past contributions to society. And she held the view that women's success depends on their ability to manage and mediate by speaking and writing effectively. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, an English writer, championed for women's education. Marcus de Condorcet believed that education was crucial for the emancipation of women. And in 1790, the book he published, The Admission of Women to the Rights of Citizenship, where he advocated for women's suffrage. Olympe de Gouges, a French playwright and a political activist, in her Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen, 1791, challenged the practice of male authority and inequality between the two genders. Women during this period had no right to vote, were regarded unfit for education, were debarred from occupation, had no right to own property, no right to divorce her husband even if he abused her. Mary Wollstonecraft published The Vindication of the Rights of Women, 1792, in which she emphasized for equal education of women so that they can become whole and independent person. The Seneca Falls Convention in United States in 1848 was the first women's rights convention which discussed the social, civil and religious conditions as well as rights of women. The convention on one hand gave women an opportunity to gain greater proportion of social, civil and moral rights for themselves, and on the other hand it was a revolutionary movement for complete equality with men. Hence, this convention was regarded as the beginning of the women's rights movement. The Nurses Training Program for Females by Nightingale in 1854 to care for the wounded soldiers had a deep impact on the British society. Amelia Pankhurst, a British activist, championed for women's education. Harriet Taylor wrote a number of essays on women's rights, ethics, Toleration and Marriage, was the joint author of the book The Enfranchisement of Women, published in 1851, for women's champion for women's education and right to vote. John Stuart Mill, in his essay on the subjugation of women, 1869, held that women were by no means less talented than men and therefore deserved equal rights with men. Mill also held the view that society was losing out if it did not make good use of the rational qualities of both men and women. He advocated a reform in the property laws so that women can retain their property rights even after marriage. It was because of the efforts of many feminists that women in UK above the age of 30 who owned houses secured the right to vote in 1918. Similarly, in 1839, women got the right of custody of their children, and in 1870, married women got the right to properties. Leaders like Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucy Stone fought for abolition of slavery and championed for women's right to vote. This led to the passing of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery and the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote. Though the focus was on women's franchise and education, but there were feminists like Valerie D. Clara and Margaret Sanger from United States who campaigned for women's sexual, reproductive and economic rights. Friedrich Engels, author of the book The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, 1884, believed that practice of male kinship was responsible for social inequality. He hoped that socialism would abolish domestic subjugation of women. Second wave. The second wave feminism began in the early 1960s and lasted for 2 decades. The first wave championed for women's suffrage and equality for women, while the second wave included a wide range of issues like family, domesticity, the workplace, sexuality, reproductive rights, domestic violence, and marital rape. The concept second wave feminism was seen in a New York Times magazine in an article by Martha Lair in 1968 titled The Second Feminist Wave. What do these women want? The first wave momentum disappeared after women secured their franchise and equality. In the 1940s, after World War II, women were into domesticity, took up no employment, kept out of politics, economics, and lawmaking. TV shows like Father Knows Best and Leave It to a Beaver further strengthened the ideals of domesticity of a woman. French writer Simone de Beauvoir made significant contribution through her treatise The Second Sex, 1949, where she argued that just because women are capable of getting pregnant, lactating, and menstruating, it does not mean that women have to be placed as the second sex. She identified the word second sex as fundamental to women's oppression. She also believed that an individual is free and responsible for determining their own development through their own efforts. She accepted Jean-Paul Sartre's percept existence precedes essence, and hence one is not born a woman but becomes one. Therefore, she wanted women to make efforts to transform their status and lifestyle across all social and cultural factors. Betty Friedan, an American activist, in 1963 published The Feminine Mystique, where she criticized the idea that women find fulfillment through homemaking and child rearing. She believed that the system made the women believe that they can find meaning to their lives through their husbands and children. She stated that placing women at home limited their possibilities and wasted their potential. The picture of nuclear family, according to Friedman's, did not reflect happiness, instead it degraded women. This system prevailed among post-World War II middle-class suburban communities. She advocated the facility of creche to enable women to carry out their professional and family responsibilities. Friedman's book was credited for the second wave feminism in United States. Due to various efforts, women secured legal victories such as Equal Pay Act 1963 and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act 1964. In 1966, Friedman, along with others, founded the National Organization for Women, which led to passing acts such as Executive Order Providing Affirmative Action Rights to Women 1967, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act 1974, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act 1978, and 1975 law requiring the US military academics to admit women. President Kennedy's government supported the feminist movement. In order to show their support, the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women was established, chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. This commission recommended paid maternity leave, greater access to education and child care centers to women. Joe Freeman and Shulmito Firestone in 1967 wanted to present their demands during the National Conference of New Politics, but the director, William F. Pepper, refused to give them time to speak. So, Freeman and Firestone called a meeting of the women, which became the first Chicago Women's Liberation Movement. Freeman started a newsletter called Voice of the Women's Liberation Movement, which paved way for women's liberation. Firestone, in her work Dialectical of Sex 1970, asserted that gender equality cannot be achieved unless women's biological traits are separated from their identity. Gender inequality is due to the patriarchal structure of society. She believed that pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing caused physical, social, and psychological disadvantage. So, through technological developments like contraception, in vitro fertilization, artificial reproduction, and other medical advances, women could free themselves from the hindrance of childbirth. She was of the opinion that children were unable to develop because of predetermined positions in the social hierarchy. So she wanted children to be raised by a collective rather than the family. Kate Millett, in her work Sexual Politics 1971, believed that relationship between sex was based on power and sustained by an ideology. Men dominate women through social authority and economic force, and it is time to crush male domination. An influential figure of the women's movement in 1968 was Gloria Steinem, a freelance journalist who supported legalized abortion and federally funded daycare centers. Black feminists like Florence Kennedy, Stanton Anthony Brigade, and Patricia Robinson were active in the 70s and pointed out connection between racism and male dominance in society through their books. Carol Hanschig's essay, The Personal is Political, in 1970, where she clearly stated that women's cultural and political inequalities are linked, and women's life and struggle under the patriarchy is political and reflect sexist power structures. Gloria Jean Watkins, an African American feminist, in her book Feminism to Center 1984, believed race and class, the movement failed to address the issues that divided women and pointed out the lack of minority voices in the women movement. At an International Alliance of Women Congress in London in 1967, the Congress urged other countries to establish National Commission on Status of Women to study and evaluate the situation of women as per the initiative of the United Nations organization. The UN declared 1975 as the International Women's Year. The period between 1976 to 1985 was declared as United Nations Decade for Women. The UN organized 4 world conferences on women from 1975 to 1995 and discussed on various areas of concern for women all over the world. For example, world and health, human rights of women, the girl child, women and poverty, etc. Third wave. The third wave is traced to the emergence of the riot girl feminist punk subculture in Olympia in early 1990s, and to Hill's televised testimony in 1991 on the appointment of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, who had sexually harassed her. The term third wave is credited to Rebecca Walker, who in an article Becoming the Third Wave 1992 wrote that the confirmation of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court was a reminder to women that the fight was not over. She said, "I'm not a post-feminism feminist. I am the third wave." She believed that third wave feminism was a movement and not a reaction, because there was much work ahead for the cause of feminism. Third wave feminists included diverse topics such as intersectionality, economic feminism, sex positivity, reproductive rights, trans feminism, postmodern feminism. It also paid attention to matters like unfair maternity leave policies, motherhood support for single mothers by means of welfare and childcare, respect for working mothers, rights of mothers who decide to leave their careers to raise. Third wave feminists have pointed that media and other offices portray women as sexual objects, which is contrary to the efforts made by women to improve themselves. Third wave feminists use personal experiences which gave women the feeling that they were not alone in this oppression and discrimination. Third wave feminists emphasized on consciousness raising that accept the fact that male domination does affect women of every generation. The victories of the second wave was taken for granted and feminism was not understood in the right context. This eventually became a challenge in the 1990s, and therefore Baumgartner and Richard wrote that we take feminism for granted. For our generation, feminism is like fluoride. We scarcely notice that we have it. It's simply in the water. Baumgartner and Richard in Young Women, Feminism and the Future 2000 have stated that feminism changes with every generation and individual. Therefore, there is need to find one's own way that is genuine to one's own generation. Third wave feminists wanted women to be conscious of the way one's gender identity and sexuality have been shaped by society, and then to develop one's own gender identity and sexuality as a way to secure power. To post-structuralist feminists like Joan W. Scott, binaries such as male-female are artificially created to maintain the power of the dominant group. The book written by Judith Butler in 1990, Gender, Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, challenged conventional notions of gender and developed gender performativity theory. She questioned certain gendered behaviors which were regarded as natural, but the author felt it was a performance that was imposed by normative heterosexuality. During the second wave, feminist leaders like Gloria E. Anazadua, Bell Hooks, Cherry Morgan, Maxine Hong Kingston had demanded race-related matters to be a part of feminism because, according to them, second wave had focused on problems of white women. But the demand did not make much headway. But in the 1990s and early 2000s, the online feminist movement reached a global audience through blogs. As a result, the goals broadened, gender-based role was abolished and included women with diverse racial and cultural identities. The concept of feminism did not take off in the right manner, as mentioned by Dinah Allen in an essay, Generations Academic Feminist in Dialogue, because the senior feminist insisted that junior feminists have to defend the same kind of feminism as advocated by senior feminists. Moreover, junior feminists had to watch their speech and tone so as not to upset the senior feminist. The junior feminist also found it difficult to prove that they were worthy feminist activities. This was pointed out by Rebecca Walker in To Be Real, Telling the Truth and Changing the Face of Feminism, wrote about her fear of rejection by her mother Alice Walker and her godmother Gloria Steinem for challenging their views. The third wave took a global perspective, that is, it gave women from developing and underdeveloped countries to fight to bring changes within their own communities. Feminism in India. In India, there are three phases of feminism. Feminism in India is a movement which aimed at establishing equal political, economic, and social rights, as well as opportunities for women. For example, right to equal wages, right to equal political opportunities, right to equal share in property, right to equal access to health and education. The first phase, which started in the mid 19th century, this was a period when reformers initiated reforms to improve the conditions of women, that is, to break from the age-old customs which subjugated women. India's feminist movement was initiated by men, and later they were assisted in their work by their sisters, daughters. The efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Vidya Sagar, Jyotirao Phule, who fought for the abolition of marriage, sati, disfiguring widows, encouraging remarriage of Hindu widows of upper caste, promoting education, legal rights to own property, and also adoption. The efforts of the British government to implement laws with respect to the Hindu family was resisted. For example, raising the age of marriage for women. In spite of the patriarchal system, there were states in India ruled by women like Rani Lakshmi Bai, Rani Chennamma, Jind Kaur, etc. In the second wave from 1915 to Indian independence, women were encouraged to join the freedom struggle. Gandhiji highlighted the feminine role of tolerance and sacrifice, thus helping them to carve a place in public arena. In the 1920s, number of women organizations were established which met and discussed issues for emancipation of women. These women organizations worked with freedom movements, and this made women conscious about their own need for emancipation. The third phase began post-independence. Women's participation and the role they played in Indian independence led to the introduction of political, economic, and civil rights to women in the Constitution. Therefore, women in India did not have to struggle for basic rights as did women in the West. Due to social and cultural systems, the rights were not honored, and so women had to move courts to secure back their rights. In the 1970s, not only inequalities between men and women were recognized, but also among caste, tribe, language, religion, region. Therefore, the feminists had to be careful while formulating their policies so that inequalities were not created. In the 21st century, feminist movement has gone beyond political and economic equality. Today, women have power to decide about their personal lives. India is a patriarchal society where males are official heads of the family. The traditions in the Indian society have existed for centuries. Women have become accustomed to the system and follow it. Despite progress made by Indian feminist movement, women still face discrimination. In spite of all odds, women have moved forward in all spheres of life, and this has opened avenues for other Indian women to follow.